Welcome back. Today we're going to continue our historic survey of propaganda through the ages. And we stopped last time with Napoleon. So he believed in censorship. So now we're going to move on to World War One. World War One took place between 1914 and 1918, so over 100 years ago. So you've got to keep in mind what kind of technology they had at that time. British propaganda in World War One was very extensive, effective, and well documented. They used in different ways principles of persuasion in the introduction of new mass media in the form of pictorial magazines, basically pictures in a magazine, radio, cinema, and telegraphic news services. It gave a whole new dimension to the speed and reach of propaganda as well as greater powers of orchestration. So lots of new technology was coming to the forefront. Uh, if they started using magazines rather than just a simple flyer or something like that, and radio was there. Cinema was starting up because that was when they were doing the um, silent movies, and then of course the telegraph was still a very popular form of communication. Six classes of literature were produced: official publications, speeches of ministers, the full texts of which were often translated into the language of the target countries. Wellington House was just a distributor. They did not actually produce content. There were publications with declarations of opinion by various classes of people and articles and interviews in the press. There were about 300 books and pamphlets distributed in 21 languages by September 1916. That is a lot for that time. Nowadays, that's a drop in the bucket, but that was really impressive for back in those days. So pictures were used for conveying a fact or the summary of an argument to to the masses, educated and uneducated. In this age of instant internet communication, it may be really difficult to understand the importance for British propaganda at the time of the relatively primitive radio and telegraph services. Now, this is impressive. The ministry was able to send out by radio 8,000 words every 24 hours to counteract enemy propaganda directed at neutral countries. And we were a neutral country for quite a long time in this conflict. The average person formed impressions almost entirely by newspapers, unless a constant stream of official wireless and cable messages were sent out. Foreign newspapers, for lack of anything better, will print faulty and misleading information. So they just wanted to have content. They didn't check their sources at all. Now, film, they estimated that film attendance at cinema theaters was around 20 million per year. So the power to influence opinion was great. What really impressed the ministry was a wide range of appeal of film, wider than any other media of propaganda, speaking to small children and people from different cultural backgrounds. For propaganda to home audiences, the ministry invented an entirely new species of film. It was named the film tag, a short film taking about 2 minutes to show and embodying, usually in a story form, some useful morale such as save coal or buy war bonds. They were called tags because they were attached to the latest news. So let's move to the mid-century. I've pretty well stayed away from talking about anything in the United States, but I am going to talk about this one because this is my own personal perspective. I grew up during this time. The propaganda techniques were the same, but honestly, the Vietnam War took it to a higher level. So I remember those newsreels, those tags that were on movies. They were doing that during the Vietnam War too, and they would kind of make them seem old timey. They were usually black and white, and it was before your movie. You would have a cartoon, you'd have a newsreel, and it was just part of the experience of going to the movie. And that war that they were covering was Vietnam. So our involvement was from 1955 to 1975. I was born after it started, and the war didn't really touch our family until the early 60s. I was around 5 when my favorite cousin, Mickey, joined the Air Force. As soon as his basic training was complete, he went straight to the conflict zone. Luckily, he was in Cambodia at a base where he was a mechanic on the planes that went on bombing strikes over Vietnam. He was one of the lucky ones who came back. He sent me letters while there, and it left a lingering impression. I mean, a young girl getting letters from her favorite cousin. It was quite quite the thing for me. The war that he was in was now on our TV every night at 6. The screen was splattered with the most horrible images. Never before was a war delivered to our living rooms every night, and it seemed like it wasn't filtered either. I realize now that that information was purposeful, and it changed from patriotic to anti-war as the time moved on. That war shaped my childhood. I was in high school before we left the conflict. I have purposely stopped our review of history here. I don't want to bias your thinking of how the world is today. That's your story to tell. I feel like that everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and they have no place in this lecture. So, today, the participation exercise is going to be very simple. What I want you to do on a Word doc, and I put do there, sorry about the typo. The word I want in a Word doc, I want you to write this phrase. I watched lecture for easy for me to say. I watched lecture 04 underscore 03, and then load that doc to the to Canvas in the appropriate spot. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about advertising, since that's why we're all here. We've covered a number of techniques of persuasion and the principles behind their operation. The 20th century brought more systematic harnessing of an even greater array of communications for media purposes of national power, prestige, war, advancement of private corporate interests. From history, we know that the aims of freedom and happiness spread by propaganda are often accompanied by repression and abuse of power. This is a good reason for viewing with suspicion any new political, economic, or technical systems that are presented by those in power to get their message across. So, this has been a quick review, but we see over and over how successful propaganda relies on underhanded presentation of its messages. We also find that propaganda involves not so much adding to the theory of rhetorical principles into the effective, all encompassing ways, but based on thorough control over all the media and mass communication. It's true that advertising often gives information and is valuable for that reason, but some forms of advertising gives little precious little information, and even that is wrong. Think about cigarette ads. There are many ways in which advertising can improve our lives by drawing attention to new products or services that is available to to the consumers, to us and to the consumers. What we've covered in this module seems pretty negative towards advertising because we're looking at the part of advertising that qualifies as propaganda. Even in this subset, there are uses of advertising. In the modern world, we clearly see benefits through large scale advertising, but there are hurdles and language problems and filters that we need to have on things like spam. So let's talk a little bit about how we go about that. I'm sure all of you have heard of snake oil salesmen or snake oil ads. Basically, they bottle water and try to sell it as some kind of tonic that's going to cure every one of your ills. Well, those are the kind of advertisements that need to be regulated. Totally tricking the consumers is not the purpose of advertising. There are services set up to monitor advertising that's misleading. And one of those earliest entities is the Better Business Bureau. I'm sure that all of you have heard about the Better Business Bureau. The Better Business Bureau was formed in part by what we now know as the American Advertising Federation, or AAF. There's a local chapter here in Lubbock, and I've been a member of it for 15 years. There's also an affiliated organization here in the college that's called TAF. That's the students' organization for American advertising. So I don't know if you know this or not, but and I'm not sure how TAF is put together, but in the American Advertising Federation, we have very close ties to the Better Business Bureau. We try to have someone on the board that is from that organization just to kind of be a self-regulating group of people. So, a little more about Better Business Bureau. They were founded in 1912. It's a private nonprofit organization whose self described mission is to focus on advancing marketplace trust. There are 106 independently incorporated Better Business Bureaus. That's hard to say fast in the United States and Canada. Um, there's one in Arlington, Virginia, that's named the Council of Better Business Bureaus. I don't know why there's a differential there, but anyway, it's not affiliated with any government agency. They are standalone and they try to root out bad advertising wherever they may find it. Okay, so let's talk about things we need to avoid when we're doing advertising. One thing we need to do is to make sure that we are kind to all people and all things. Women have been demeaned in advertising. Sometimes advertising encourages greed. Sometimes it encourages antisocial behavior. And more often than we'd like to think, it reinforces ethnic stereotypes. Even gambling mentality is encouraged, especially online. I don't know if any of you are little game players on your phone or whatever, but a lot of them have ads, and there's a lot of gambling ads that show up there that can really just be so destructive to families and people and families. The targeting of children deserves a special condemnation when they're used as means of putting emotional pressure on parents to purchase objects, either expensive toys or food products. Advertising sometimes presents false imagery through, and then they repeat it constantly to make it seem as if it is true. And finally, general cultural attitudes are shaped as well as followed by advertising. Let's talk about words. Word meanings can be altered for propaganda using a simple word and changing the meaning of it. A good example of that is back in the 60s. Um, Consumerism was a word that meant better value and safety. Today, it means to consume to excess. So, totally turned that meaning on its head. When hotly disputed matters are at stake, people often use definitions that tend to favor their side of an argument. We need to recognize that language has uses other than mere description. It can extort, evaluate, threaten, and express emotions. Continuing with words, I want to talk about someone who has added a great deal of words in our language, our common language. And that man is George Orwell. People from both sides of the aisle have claimed Orwell as defending their side. So, about George Orwell. His birth name was Eric Blair, and he was born in India in 1903. He was educated in Eton, later serving in Burma with the Indian Imperial Police. So, some of his best known works, I'd say his top two was Animal Farm in 1984. And if y'all have not read those books in high school literature, I would suggest that you read those. Those are very, very informative, and I highly recommend them. There are some memorable quotes that come from Animal Farm, such as, "Some are more equal than others," and "Four legs good, two legs bad." You really would need to read those books to understand the context of it, but it's often used in rhetoric these days. Then there was 1984. And so there are lots of things that come from this particular book, like Newspeak, Big Brother. I mean, there's a TV show named Big Brother, for heaven's sakes. And then Doublethink. an example of how we use Newspeak today, people are not fired anymore or laid off. They're subject to restructuring, downsizing, workforce readjustments, or negative employee retention. Okay, we're going to stop here for today. If you have any questions, please email or text me. And next up, we're going to do lecture 4.